With my watch properly set to the time, let me thank DiscoveryOptic for making this video possible. DiscoveryOptic is an Amazon company. Simple as that. We'd already looked previously at their 3 to 15, which wasn't bad for the price, but it had some inherent flaws. This 5 to 25 should be a little bit better, I hope, than this, but there's only one way to find out, and that's to dig down real deep and see if they've made any improvements. Now, if you didn't watch the 3 to 15 video, because let's say you're not interested in MPVOs, you want HPVOs like this is a $400 kit. I say kit because it's more than just the optic itself. For right now, on Amazon, for $3.99, I already had this mostly apart, you get all of this. But before we get to any of this stuff, let's see what the quality control card says. And you can see this is handwritten. Someone went through this and checked all of this stuff out, which is kind of nice to see that they did a quality control check on an optic before sending it out the door. And this came direct from Amazon. This wasn't from their facilities in China where they make this to my door. It was just from what you would buy coming off the shelf itself. Little card goes over all the specifications of what this optic is and what its capabilities are, and the regular instruction manual is just that. It's a very basic instruction manual. Regardless to what I say about this optic, you have to remember the price point. This is $400 for a 5 to 25. That comes with not just a set of rings to your height, but a half-decent leveling kit. It's not as good as the other leveling kit that I had reviewed, but it's not bad either. It's kind of interesting that they include it in the kit, but I've never seen this before, with the exception of like a spur mount. But this is a full deployment kit, if you will. But the most interesting thing about this entire setup is the fact that you have not one, not two, but 3 sunshades. I don't get it. I really don't get it. But you know exactly what I'm going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, and that will be seeing just how effective these 3 are going to be on this optic. But before we get to that, we must unsheath this rather large optic. One thing that's interesting to note is it comes with a flip-up cap on the front, but just a regular little rubber cap on the rear. I don't know why, but it does. For the remainder of this video, I will remove this just because it's going to take up space. Hold on. As far as the cattail, you can see on the magnification ring right there, we have tiny, like 4mm threads for it. And it screws in like so. So at least it's nice that they include something. But that's the trick behind this optic, is it includes literally everything for $400. And I'm sure come Black Friday or sometimes throughout the year, these will probably go on sale for even less than that. So I can understand completely that this will be a compelling argument to many people out there, but it's not the be-all end-all. But despite that, this is still going to have a lot of stiff competition. But we're going to touch on that soon. Believe it or not, 41 ounces, as is with the cattail, is not a terrible weight. One of the competitors that I will be putting up against it, well, not this one in particular, but its larger brother, the 6 to 24. This is the Arken SH4 Gen II. Comes in at only 2.5 ounces lighter. And if we were to take a look at my 5 to 25 Venom, well, this thing actually weighs a little bit more, but it also includes ARC M10 rings. Starting at the back, we have a fast focus eyepiece. It does have some hard spots to get through. The knurling on this is very aggressive, but it doesn't really feel all that great. All the way out, quarter turn in. It's actually pretty solid, side to side, up and down rather, and side to side is pretty good. But again, there's, like, that's a hard spot. And then it gets soft. And then it gets softer, and then it gets even softer. You can see how easily that moves in now. As for the magnification ring, we start at 5 at 12 o'clock. And 25 just past 6 o'clock, so a little bit more than 180 degrees, which is nice that they include a throw lever, little cattail, to be able to turn this thing a little bit easier. Knurling on this is all the same, from the eyepiece, magnification ring, illumination, side focus, and both turrets are basically the same knurling, which is really nice. I love to see that. As far as adjusting the magnification ring, You can do it fairly easily with just the knurling that's here, but of course the cattail is going to make your life a lot easier and faster. It honestly feels pretty good. But other than that, unlike the fast focus eyepiece, there's no weird hard spots. Not terrible. From there, we're going to take a look at the illumination control, but more specifically the battery compartment inside. Removing that, we have, guess what? A standard battery compartment. I bet there's going to be 3 dimples in there. There are our 3 dimples. They just decided to make this control gigantic. This is at least a 1/2 inch larger overall on the diameter as what we'd normally see on any other illumination control on an optic. And if we look at the illumination control, we have 6 overall brightness settings, but listen to that detent. That's actually fantastic. Sounds a little hollow, but look, there's no wiggle once you're inside that detent. Offs in between each position, and a very positive, very serious click. That's actually quite nice. Another thing that's quite nice is just look at how large our adjustment is for our parallax. This thing does have a minimum side focus of 25, I'm going to assume, yards. Goes all the way up to infinity. It's about a 270-degree sweep. And just look at how large this is. This is great for making really finite adjustments on your target, especially in the higher magnification range. Something that you don't really see all too often, and I gotta say, it actually feels really good. There's no weird hard spots. No weird noises. It just sort of turns quite nicely, actually. I really like the action on this. The only thing I'd be worried about is this interfering with an action, potentially, if you're running left-handed, or just maybe getting really too close to a receiver or a mount. Other than that, I don't mind this large knob at all, because I like the ability to really fine-tune my focus. And with this, it's going to make your life a lot easier, because again, it's significantly larger, so technically you have to move this in a lot more to then get to what, let's say, the focus would be on this Athlon. You could see the wheel is significantly larger, which means that it should allow us to get that perfect spot if the glass is good enough to actually be able to see the target clearly to begin with. Moving on to the elevation turret, and something caught my eye with how those arrows are set up. Even the font is the same as what we see with the Arken. It's basically identical, or at least as close as it could be without being identical. So, before we even look at the DO, let's give these a twist. Honestly, the Arkens have excellent feeling and sounding turrets. So, if this DO can replicate that in even a half-assed way, not half bad. That actually sounds and feels awesome. There's very little play in the detent, so it's actually got a quite a nice snap to it. And again, these controls are huge, so you can be able to put a light twist on it to get it to move, as opposed to, again, let's say a smaller turret like this SWFA, where you got to be really careful because you could over torque it and move multiple detents at once. So honestly, this is set up fairly well. We're going to take a quick peek under the elevation cap to see what the zero stop system looks like. Whoa, that took a lot of effort to get off. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3 set screws. This tab will bottom out against that as our zero, and it's honestly pretty nice. It's pretty beefy in there. The cross section between the splined area where the cap secures to and the threads is pretty small, but I mean, the rest of this is so large that most of the torque when you're adjusting this, or if you hit this into something, is going to go into the housing over here against that big old fat O-ring, as opposed to up here. So I honestly wouldn't be too worried about damaging this. Get ready for the money shot, ladies and gentlemen. Spaceball 1 is about to come through. Holy shit. Look at the size of that thing. I literally can't fit it on my desk. I can't fit it in frame. For the uninitiated, that is 13 3/4 of sunshade. That's right, included in the box. I don't know why. What is going on here, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know. Please, Lynn, answer me. Why? I've never seen anything like this. This is truly perplexing. Now, I would love to get back into torture testing of a realistic environment, get it wet, drop it a few times, not trying to destroy it, but just seeing if it'll jostle anything to make it inoperable in the proper sense of the term. I might try to do it with this. But there's one thing that we can do together, and that's at least see if the glass clarity is good, if it tracks well, and if it would work just as it's intended to. So, without further ado, let's get behind this thing and see how well it functions. Just because this scope and its smaller brother, the 3-15, are sold here in the US doesn't necessarily mean that these are designed and built for our market. These are actually built for a market that doesn't have access to all of the quote-unquote military optics that we have access to. Believe it or not, there are some companies out there that can't get Vortex products, that can't get Night Force products, that can't get products that are sometimes even made in their own country, just because they're quote-unquote military or tactical optics. So armed with that information, let's get on with the rest of the review. This is a first focal plane optic. As you can clearly see, as we increase the magnification, the reticle will maintain its size representative to the proper scaling. Here, at the maximum magnification of 25x, you will see that the reticle doesn't look all that sharp in some areas. Adjusting the rear eyepiece will, in fact, make those areas a little bit better, at the cost of making the rest of the reticle worse. This is not a confidence-inspiring performance, and we're only looking at the very first part of the optic, which is the reticle and the eyepiece. It's not great. The illumination brightness actually isn't terrible for what it is. Honestly, most HPVOs don't even have illumination, and if they do, they're usually not great. So the fact that this has at least decent looking illumination here is at least a good thing. There is a little bit of play inside the detent, but other than that, they sound and feel actually really good. I must have had a lot to say when I was doing the tracking test on this because it was like a 6+ minute long segment, and that's just way too long. Focusing on the tracking on this thing, 4 over 4 down, reveals it's actually pretty decent. It's about 1/10 of a mil off, and honestly, I've reviewed some very expensive scopes that perform about the same level. Continuing down with the tracking test all the way to 10 mils, you'll see that we are going to gain a little bit extra on the elevation, but also we're going to have some shift on the windage. Again, I've noticed that with some very expensive optics, so to see it here is not a real shock to the system. And honestly, it could be worse. We're only off about 1.5 clicks on the elevation. The big thing to take note of, though, as I adjust the side focus, is that the scaling of both the image, or the target, and the reticle are changing size. That should not be the case. That means if you're paying attention and you range something on this one distance and then go farther out and adjust your side focus and range it there, you might not get the exact same sort of numbers. So it's definitely not going to be the most ideal situation. This thing definitely has some problems. Let's focus our attention now at our 30-yard power transformer here at 5x and see if we could find a couple more problems. Here, you can't really notice much. Another thing you can't notice much is the illumination. Here on full, it's barely noticeable. At 25x, you could just make out the slightest amount of illumination to the center part of the reticle. Keep in mind, it was a very overcast day when I filmed this, so not really great. Another not great thing is just the sharpness to the reticle. I back it out to about 20x just so I could adjust the rear diopter a little bit more to show you what I'm on about. We can get the center of the reticle and the image fairly decent, but trying to get the rest of the reticle sharp does mean that both the image and the center part of the reticle fall apart as well. I never found that setup that was both perfect for the image and the reticle, but your mileage may vary. Let's shift our attention now to our 400-yard brick building and talk about another shortcoming of this optic, and that is the distortion that it has. To help illustrate this a little bit better, I'm going to take a screenshot and draw some lines. That roof line at the bottom is about 40 yards away. That line is straight across from side to side. Look at the belly on top of it. Furthermore, at that 400-yard parapet, you can see again there is a big belly on top. This is something that you can't get away from, no matter what magnification you're on, no matter how the rear diopter is set, or how the side focus is set. There always seems to be a fair amount of fisheye, no matter what you try to do to mitigate it. With that glaring obvious fault, let's continue on with the rest of the review. At 400 yards, the image doesn't look terrible, all things considered, and even though we're in a very overcast environment, the colors look pretty good. Slowly increasing the magnification, though, is going to show some other shortcomings. We saw it earlier on our Reticle Overview, but here at 25x in this lower light, sort of shittier light environment, you can see those shadows creep up around the outside of the reticle. And again, there's nothing you could really do to mitigate that. And if you're wondering, aren't you going to adjust the side focus to get the image a little bit sharper? That's as good as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't get any better than that. But keep in mind, the lighting is pretty bad. So we'll take a look at some better lighting in just a moment. But before we get there, let me take another screenshot and draw some more red lines to show you just how bad the fisheye is here at 400 yards at 25x. It is very apparent. Let me now throw this up side by side with some competitor optics. Now, on the right, we are going to have the Arken SH4 II 6-24. This is actually less expensive than the DiscoveryOptic is at like $330 right now, and you can find them on sale every once in a while for even less. Honestly, for that price, it's a really good scope. Yeah, they're not great, they're not perfect, but for the price, the Arken is a decent little optic. And you could see, even though we are only 1x more on the Arken, it does have a much smaller field of view as opposed to the DO, though the view looking through it is roughly the same as far as the overall crop. As far as these images overall side by side, you must remember these were both filmed on very dissimilar days. The DO was filmed in the dead of winter with very dry, clear air, whereas with the Arken it was filmed around the summertime with very thick, humid air. So of course the images are going to look somewhat different. With both of these turned up to their maximum magnifications, I have to give the sharpness to the DO. And honestly, the contrast is better with it as well. However, the Arken as a whole is better. It's got less distortion, the reticle is much sharper, and everything does focus up a little bit better with it. But the colors, contrast, and center sharpness I give to the DO, but that's not enough for me to sway it towards that way. Let's focus our attention now at the 900-yard power tower. And believe it or not, here, I gotta give it to the DO, though again, I must maintain the air quality during the Arken video was not great. Why did I not pull it out and do a side-by-side comparison on the same day? Well, it's packed and ready to go for a new home, but more on that later. Here at 900 yards though, I gotta give it to the DO, but that's probably only because we can't figure out what the distortion looks like. Our next comparison is going to be that of the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 6-24. This is a $650-ish scope, so much more expensive than the DO and much more expensive than the Arken that we just looked at. But again, this is basically the exact same setup optic as both the DO and the Arken. So it pays dividends for us to put them side by side and see how well they fare against one another. The Athlon feels very good in hand, so as an overall package, I have to give it to that. And here, focusing on our 400-yard brick buildings on very similar days, though years apart, I gotta give it to the Athlon. There's no way I can't. It's a much better product overall. It's got much better feel to it. It's got better glass. It's got better reticles, and it's got a better warranty. It's got a little bit of basically everything that's better. And again, the proof is in the pudding. Just look at these two images side by side. The Athlon was a little bit washed out from when I recorded it, but the image is flatter, it is sharper, and the reticle is in focus from edge to edge. Though, oddly enough, here at 900 yards, the image again overall just looks a little bit better with the DO. With the Athlon, it seems to have a little bit more chromatic aberration that creeps up, and when I do finally get the power tower in focus, it doesn't have the same vibrancy as the DO's image. It's definitely something to take note of, but it could have just been the shadows that were on the power tower that day. Last but absolutely certainly not least is what this scope was apparently modeled on. It is the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 4.5 to 27 by 56. This is still, in my opinion, one of the benchmark optics, especially for the price. However, that price is still about 4 times the cost of what this DO is going to set you back. That's right, you can find them for around $1,600, but they're usually a little bit more. The secondhand market does have these pop up in the $1,400 to $1,500 range if you are patient and you look extremely often. With all that being said though, there is no comparison between these two. The DO does sometimes manage to look pretty decent, but it's still extremely rough around the edges. Things like the Arken and the Athlon both perform well for their price points. And you know what? That's perfectly fine if that's well within your budget. Many people don't have the kind of money that you need to spend on a product like the Razor. So the other two options are, well, options. The same thing goes with this DO. But again, I must maintain, not every country in the world has access to things even like the Arken and the Athlon, despite the fact that those are made in China. I think the Athlon's made in China. I'm like 99% sure it's still made in China. But some countries don't have access to those optics. They don't have access to things like the Razor. So their OEMs are trying their best to produce their own sort of high-end tactical scope. And that's what this DO is. And it's basically a first generation. And that's what we have to take into consideration. This is a first-gen optic by an OEM that's trying to replicate some of the best optics on the market, in my opinion. This Razor HD Gen 2. So if we look at this as a first draft, for the price, it's not terrible. However, it's not great either. It does, however, manage to maintain a fairly good-looking image when we go off-center. Here at 25x, it doesn't seem to fall apart as we've seen in some other high-end optics. This is a decent performance, and when we back out the magnification even further, it still performs surprisingly good. And it gets even better the lower we go down in the magnification range, which is sort of typical for any optic. This is a better performance than I was brutally expecting, especially when we saw just how much shadows creeped in at 25x earlier. If the sun is out, it doesn't really show that sort of imperfection with the brightness to the image. So if you're going to throw this on a really inexpensive 22 and probably take it out only on nice days, it's not the worst performer in that regard. However, if you take it beyond this sort of distance, it does start to fall apart, especially when you start adding elevation. At 1,000 yards, things start to take a turn. Here, we adjust that side focus just so to get the best possible image, but we do have a lot of mirage the day that I film this, so that's going to hinder the performance of the glass as a whole. But once we add about 10 mils of elevation, and then readjust the camera because the exit pupil shifted a little bit, the image does get really, really soft and dark. It's not great. So, yeah, it's not great. And unfortunately, this next segment's going to showcase some more weaknesses of it. The sun has gone well over the horizon. We're deep into the twilight time right now, and there isn't a whole lot of ambient light left. The illumination on high is just what I'd consider acceptable for the current environment, but any brighter than this, it's not really going to be all that great. But the real problem comes in when we start dialing up with the magnification. And as you can see it, once we get around 20x and above, the image gets really dark and basically unusable. So don't use this thing above 15x, I would say, in dark environments. Panning across our 50-yard line at the small bore range, you can see that distortion come in full effect. But why is that distortion there to begin with? It's a 5 to 25 with a 34mm tube and a 56mm front objective. How come optics like this have that much distortion? Well, I haven't really talked much about this, but that is just the massive view looking through this. Look how much of the scope body we see. Honestly, it's not a lot. And when you get behind it in person, it sort of fades away, very reminiscent of a Gen 2 Razr HD. And in fact, the view looking through it, again, I didn't talk about it in that comparison, but we will be talking about it in the next comparison with the Razr in just a moment. But the view looking through this thing is absolutely gigantic. And I think they sacrificed some distortion issues to have that image be so big. However, because of that glass setup, they did manage to pull off a pretty forgiving eyebox here at 5x. Truth be told, you can get really close to it, really far away from it, or off to either side, and you could still manage to look through it fairly easily. So at 5x at least, it's pretty good. At about 15x though, it starts to get significantly tighter. This is basically as tight as you'd find a 3-15 with a 30mm tube and a much smaller front objective. So not great. And if any of the previous footage of the 25x on this thing is anything to go by, then the eyebox is going to be extremely, extremely tight. You truly have to be perfectly behind this thing to look through it in any way, shape, or form that's going to be good. It's almost unusable, to be brutally honest. As we do one more final side-by-side comparison between this and the Gen 2 Razr HD, I'm going to get into my final thoughts. This is not meant for the US market. It's sold here, but it's not meant for this market. It's meant for a market, like I've said numerous times, that doesn't have access to all of the great things that we have access to. We have access to almost everything in the US, and I think we've become a little jaded. We lose sight of just how good we have it. Some other countries don't have it as good, and thus they have to make do with what they've got, or make it themselves. And in that regard, this thing, for the price, doesn't perform terribly. Truth be told, it does have some massive shortcomings, but ultimately, as a whole, it's not the end of the world, and it's definitely not the worst I've gotten my hands on. Here at about 180 yards is proof positive that it can produce a fairly acceptable image towards the center. You just have to take basically the outside half and just throw it away and not even look at it. But where it counts, where you're actually shooting at, can be pretty damn good. Here at 200 yards, you can spot some 5.56 holes. Yeah, it's on a shoot and see, but it still manages to produce a fairly decent image at the very far center. The outside edge does suck basically all the time, but again, considering that this is a first attempt from an OEM in China for a really low price, I have to give it a pass in some regards. Do I recommend this? No. Ultimately, I can't, because there's so much other stiff competition that this thing has to go up against, at least here in the US market. The Arken, I'd probably give it to first. Any of the SWFA fixed X, I'd probably take it over. There are just so many other options that we have the luxury of shopping around for that I can't recommend this. However, you might want this. You might like this. You might like that it comes with rings and 14 plus inches of sunshades, and you might like the way it's set up, but that's up to you. And if you're buying this, I've given you as much proof of how it's going to perform in your hands on your gun as possible. Oh, that's right. The side focus, the knob is too fucking big, and it hits into a lot of stuff. So, DO, if you're watching this, make that a little bit smaller, because with my QD mounts, I could not lock the front cam all the time because it would just constantly hit. So, definitely something to take note of. It is a bit of a disaster up there. And if you've made it through this entire review, I bet I've sounded a little polarizing, going from this is pretty good to this is pretty bad to this is really bad to this is actually pretty good. And it's the truth. It's a hodgepodge, but this is from a company that's really starting to plant their feet down firmly and just move forward. And this being a first product from DO, I'm kind of excited to see what their Gen 2 stuff might be. In another couple of years, this might be competing with some of the other really good alternative low to mid budget HPVOs, or in fact their MPVOs as well. So you never know what this might turn into. This might turn into something really good. As for right now, if you're in the US, I would absolutely look elsewhere, unfortunately. But if you're in a market where this is the only thing you have, well, hopefully you found this video informative, and please let me know in the comment section below. But with all that being said, a big thank you for DO for sending this in for review. they were more than happy to send it to me and for me to give them my honest criticism of it. It does have a lot of shortcomings, but it does manage to do some things quite well. Hopefully, though, you've used this video to your best ability to make an educated decision on your next purchase, and you won't be disappointed if you get it. But with all that being said, thank you all very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.